So I was wondering what the music was going to be. I was able to request a song and I thought Eye of the Tiger might be a bit much, especially when I just roll into talking about the dreaming. But thank you so much. Welcome. It's wonderful to be here at Design Outlook 24. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people in the Kulin Nation. And I am Darryl Wallen-Ewan. I'm from Sydney. And so a lot of what I will talk about today is connected to my country. I think a lot of people, a lot of Aboriginal people after the referendum are returning back to their own nations and are focusing on a new age of reckoning and building their individual nations. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. And it's been a bit of a revelation for me to come back to that and to be focusing on Sydney Harbour and the story of Sydney Harbour. My ancestors were camping at the Opera House when the first fleet arrived. So a lot of the work that I do is around, I guess, design as an act of power and design as a weapon, really, for social justice. So, but I'm going to start. I was a bit worried when I saw Finn's hair because I thought, he's like, yeah, no, we're your support act. And I was thinking, is this going to be like Leonard Cohen supporting Van Halen? Because what I have to speak about, I guess, is deeply spiritual and deeply, a lot of the work that I do, I'm 50 this year, and throughout my practice, I quite often describe myself as a concrete Koori with a Westfield dreaming, right? So when you grow up as an Aboriginal person in the city, the process of discovering our ontology and our religion, our dreaming, has been this really slow evolving process for me. But I want to share what I've learnt today with you. I want to share it because design is a process of decision making, right? And technology is applied science. So, the framework that we're all making decisions to create this technology is based on a Western view of science. So what I want to talk to you about today is a non-Western view of science. And thinking about, really Aboriginal culture is this, it's a very well-designed society. I think part of the success of Aboriginal societies was that it was highly designed. There was a very strong system of decision-making. There were rules. It wasn't just a free-for-all. I've heard the speakers before me and I wondered whether, are there sort of crossroads that we come to in the creation of design and technology where we just go, actually, no. I've often thought about why my people don't have a strong clay culture, like why we didn't really, surely someone picked up some mud and threw it in the fire and kind of went, oh, there's clay, oh, we could make all sorts of stuff out of this. But of course that would create a sedentary society where they would have to stay in one place and suddenly build houses and, not move with the seasons and not move with the climate and not adapt to the climate. And so the answer was no. No, we're not going to do that. No, we're not going to create architecture that is permanent and sedentary because that's going to create all sorts of problems, right? Because our culture was based on a holistic order, this coherence with nature, and that nature was the primordial raison d'etre. Our reason for being is country. So we'll talk about country a lot. It's going to go right through and talk through different disciplines of design because I guess my practice has been extremely multidisciplinary. I'm a shapeshifter in that sense. I sort of started out in architecture, but then I moved into filmmaking and all sorts of product design and things like that. And I'm now at UTS creating an Aboriginal architecture school because I want to get street kids, like full mission breed Aboriginal kids, into the widest industry in Australia to see what happens. So, yeah. And it will be based on this philosophy. So I'm going to start by talking about the dreaming. So, and it was interesting, hearing the speakers before us talk about the future, because I think we should need to actually go right back to time immemorial. When, in the dreaming, the earth was liquid, so everything was soft, and our environment was occupied by these ancestral beings, these dreaming heroes, we call them. And they were part plant, part human, and part animal. So you had the kangaroo man, the yam woman, like they were these ancestral beings. And some rose up from underground and went up into the sky, and they took the earth with them. And they created landforms. Some travelled across the land and they left behind them knowledge systems. They left behind them tracks, ancestral tracks, which we refer to as songlines, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But these ancestral beings, they left their perpetual energies everywhere they went. Everything they touched, they left their energies. It might be in a tree. So when they died, their energies went into the ground, and they are still very much a part of Australia today. Is that these energies are... Australia is full of these interconnected sites, these sacred sites, and that they contain the perpetual energies of these ancestral heroes. These heroes, when they died, at some point, the dual identity, or the triple identity in some cases, of these ancestral heroes split. So the humans, the plants, and the animals all became separate. But some of the energy of the animal and the plant stayed in the human, and some of the energy of the human stayed in the plants and the animals. And that's how you have these very strong totemic relationships that were set up between Aboriginal people and their country, their environment. That's why, and it comes with this, I guess, it's more than identity, it's sort of, it's your whole purpose in life, that you would die for country. There's this really beautiful story of this warrior. It's a tragic story, really. This warrior in Tasmania, Manalagana, at the end of the 19th century, was running from... it was martial law in Tasmania, so anyone could shoot to kill an Aboriginal person. And the last band of Aboriginal people were running, and it was led by Manalagana. There was about 20 of them. And he was pretty good. Like, he'd actually evaded the killers, the murderers, pretty well. But he ran past a bit of country that needed burning. And so he stopped to burn it. And it gave away his location, and his entire family and everyone were caught. I guess that tells you the compulsion to care for country, and that compulsion, that connection that you have to country is greater than the value of your own life and the life of your own family. So that sort of sets up, I guess, that sort of connection that we have to country. We hear a lot about country. I think we hear the welcome to country. But what's sitting, I guess, really at the heart of it is that we see country as a family member. And when we do a welcome to country, we're inviting everyone in this room to see country like it is your family member. Sing to country, long for country, worry about country, and care for country. And that means sky country, water country, sea country, freshwater country. See it as a part, like what kind of country do you, as well as land, obviously. But it includes all plants and animals, and it includes all the things we make and build. All of that is an extension of country. It has come from country and it will go back to country. So it is country. It's all part of it. So if you start to see it all as a sense of oneness, you'll find where the glitches are. I love the embrace the glitch. There was a couple of glitches in that presentation and I'm glad the boys embraced it. But there are a lot of glitches, I guess, in the way that we have kind of seen our society, but there are some things I think that we desperately need to fix. I'm here want to talk to you about Songlines. It's it was an evocative phrase that was coined by an American, actually, Bruce Chatwin, who came here in the 50s. But it was actually quite brilliant, really. He hung out with the Aranda people, but he did say that Aboriginal people use songs in order to navigate, which is true, that as Aboriginal people are travelling around country every day over time, they might be singing a song, and it does relate to geographic locations and it does help them navigate from A to B. However, it's much more sophisticated than that. What songlines are, so Aboriginal people didn't have the written word. So how did we pass on vast amounts of ecological and cultural and social data without the written word, without writing any of it down? All of our science, all of our law. Apparently you needed to know 400 plants, when they flower, what parts were poison, what parts were potion, how to prepare them. Like, it's a lot, right? It's a lot to think about. So how that was done was that this data was encoded into fictional stories, which was then embedded into geographic locations, including the stars, right? So if you look at something like, and they're called threads of knowledge as well, right? So if you look at something like the Seven Sisters Dreaming, which is a story, a fictional story, about a man with a giant penis who is chasing these 7 women across thousands and thousands of kilometres. I'd said the giant penis thing because part of the essence of a good story is that you remember it, right? So everyone's going to be thinking about the giant penis all day. And that's great because that means it's connected to all of this ecological and cultural data, because at different parts of the story, the women turn into plants. Like everyone in the story shapeshifts. They turn into plants, they turn into animals. And what it's saying is that, so Wadinyeri, the man, he will be like diving under the earth at a particular point and he'll rise up somewhere and he'll turn into a kangaroo. And at that part of the story, the women are up to something. The women are the Pleiades, the star constellation. So when the star constellation is on the horizon, that will tell you when this plant is ready for harvest. That will also tell you Wadinyeri's diving under the earth and he's coming up and turning into a kangaroo. There's no hunting for kangaroo here at that time. But over here, you can get the kangaroo when the star constellation is doing a particular thing. And so as the climate changed, this web of knowledge would move and shift and the story would need to change. The story would need to change and the rules would need to change as well. Because there were dreaming stories for everything. There's a diarrhea dreaming. There's a dreaming... I always think we should have a single mother dreaming because it's connected to social mores as well. And, I just want the kids to do the dishes occasionally. So I'm going to create a story about a single mother dreaming. But it shifts and moves. So it is actually a highly adaptable system. And the fact that it's connected to stories, the story can change, right? Because that's fictional. It can actually change. So as different materials came into country, glass came into country, metal axes came into country. All of the rules had to change, but it was very, very deliberate, and they took it very seriously too. It wasn't just like, in a way, we need an AI dreaming in a way, because there needs to be a bunch of rules that are written and thought about, and we need to actually sit down and, like, on a cultural governance kind of level and think about how this is actually going to affect society and what stories need to change in order to ensure those rules are maintained. Otherwise, the holistic order is going to be out and country will be destroyed. And when we talk about country, we're talking about society as well, because encoded in all of these songlines are also social mores. So some of these characters, if they get up to trouble as well, that they'll die or they'll turn to stone, or something hideous will happen to them. So this system of songlines, so as you moved, as an Aboriginal person, as you moved through country over time, and I was thinking about that high fidelity thing too, because that was about the recreation of something in high fidelity. It was incredibly accurate, actually, way of passing on knowledge. Songlines, there wasn't this kind of issue of like, when you do these whispers and they get out of control. It was actually an incredibly accurate way of passing on knowledge, and it was connected to geographic locations. So as you moved through country over time, every day you would go through these sites of learning, uploading and downloading information, and it was downloaded in multiple art forms. So it wasn't just the story of Wadinyeri. There's a dance for the Seven Sisters Dreaming. There is a song for the Seven Sisters. There's several songs for the Seven Sisters Dreaming. You would carve it. You would etch it. You would, keep reiterating this story in everything you make and build around you, so that it's a system of mnemonic learning. So it's actually a much more effective way of remembering. So say, for instance, you could create a songline around your own house. If you wanted to learn a language, you just put stick-it notes all around the house, and every day that you're moving through your house and you walk past that stick-it note at the top of the stairs next to the toilet, when you need to remember that bit of data, your mind will go back to that place. And you could start adding symbols to that stick-it note, and that will actually reinforce it. You could add a song to that stick-it note, and that would again reinforce it. And so what that actually does is create a connection to country that is connected to your brain and connected to all of the knowledges that you have in your brain. And so I guess it becomes more precious, it becomes more meaningful. And of course, that's where you develop this compulsion to care for that knowledge. Imagine if you just knock down those trees, or you destroy, you blow up, literally blow up a sacred site, is akin to walking into, the Mitchell Library and just burning every single book. That is outrageous thought. But that's why the destruction of country is the destruction of knowledges. And that is connected to everything we make and build as well. So this is a beautiful still from a film that you can see at the National Museum of Australia. It's a man making a fish trap. Frank Gramanamana in the 1970s is making a fish trap. And as he's making the fish trap, he's gone to a plant and got maybe one of the body parts of the ancestors, collected it, and now he's weaving it into a fish trap. And as he's weaving, he's talking to the fish trap. So he's speaking to the fish trap ancestor, and he's saying, you made this waterhole over here, and at this waterhole, at this particular time of year, I can get this, particular species of fish. And then he might bust into song. So he's actually, as he's making the object, and I liked the reference to living artefacts, because everything in our ontology, in our religion, in our belief system, even objects are all living. The rock is living. Everything is living because we have this constant dialogue with it. And so we vitalise it with this life force. We're vitalising it with the dreaming. So the artist or the maker or the designer is simply a medium through which the ancestral beings are speaking, and that it is our job to encode that object with the library of the dreaming, with ecological data. So, it's an interesting idea as designers of things and systems and places and objects to think about that as a kind of brief. Like, how can I encode this object with meaning? Or how can I encode this object or this place with an ancestral library? Something about nature, something about our connection to nature. Even if you just take that as a simple gesture that you want to kind of not just put more stuff into the world, that you want to create something that is living. And I guess, if you look at family heirlooms, it's not an outrageous part of the human condition for us to actually animate objects and to think about them as living things. Because when somebody dies and you're left with that precious thing, it might be a hat or a pair of shoes, it becomes that person. And so you would never throw it away. It's a beautiful part. It's a beautiful way of looking at sustainability because it taps into human emotion and it taps into your heart, really. So how can you create things that people care about so much that they would never destroy it? A lot of what I do is in architecture, and it's interesting. I wrote a book with Paul Memmott, who, he's an anthropologist, amazing. His writings are beautiful, and he writes about the dreaming in a beautiful way, and he travelled all through communities in the 1960s. Very interesting guy, but I often talk to him about our traditional housing, and it was purely functional. Like it was like a second skin, it was like clothing. And the reason for that is that we didn't place our whole identity within our homes like we do today. We're sort of obsessed in a way with that. So the idea of home was, or nura is a word that is pretty common to all 300 languages, Aboriginal languages across Australia. But nura is a cultural landscape. It's broader than just your little house on your little plot of land. And so is it possible for everyone in this room to think about where is your homelands, where is your nura, and it goes beyond your home. Because colonisation happened, obviously it came to a place that had a system, very, very sophisticated, holistic system, coherent to nature. I mean, even Captain Cook did acknowledge that when he sailed off the coast. If you read his actual diaries, he does acknowledge that the natives of New Holland, as they were called, were the happiest people he'd ever witnessed. That the land and sea provided them everything that he would have just watched our mobs all the way up on the east coast, including mine down at La Perouse, and just seen them hanging out on the beach and boating, camping, fishing, actually, to be honest. Which, is the great dream of everyone, except we've sort of got tied up to kind of, with our obsession with real estate. We're now slaves to this kind of, to mortgages. And we try and squeeze in a bit of BCF on the weekends, which is absolutely cooked in my mind. Because then this new system came, and I always talk about, the thing that invaded that was really insidious in a way was Western science. because imperial science at that time in 1770 was only 150 years old. And that was, it's brought us a lot of things and it's great. I'm not going to bag it, right? But what the problem with it, in a way, is the taxonomic classification of everything in nature. Everything got separated. Plants were over there, animals were over there, meteorology was over there, biology was over there. Like, all of the sciences and how they were studied and how everything was looked at was all separated. And what that did was create this belief that we're sort of... It reinforced this separateness that humans have to nature. And even human-centred design has humans at the top, right? And everything else at the bottom. When we talk about designing with country and country-centred design, the human is in amongst all of it, right? So we've got to try and return to that. Because, kind of having all of this borrowed architecture, borrowed landscapes from other places, it's just not working. It's not good for the climate. It's also a completely different belief system and something that we just have no connection with, really, whatsoever. And I think that that's what's, I'm not going to go on my high horse about real estate, but I'll just go on my high horse about real estate just for 38 seconds and just say that this obsession that we have with creating these McMansions out in the suburbs where people say, oh, look, I'm going for French Riviera or whatever, who gives a fuck, man? And really, they're going to pass on mortgages to their kids, guys. This is insane. It's insanity. And yet they'll just work like slaves in jobs they hate to go and build this shit. You're better off living in a van down by the river, really. And Robin Boyd wrote The Australian Ugliness, which is an excellent book. You should read it. In the 1960s, it's 60 years old. 60-year anniversary of that book just recently. And, he was talking about suburbs, in the 1950s that were probably pretty cute now by comparison. And he called it beacherism, which was just this kind of just grabbing these veneers, from other places and just kind of... It really is this very desperate attempt to have a sense of belonging. So let's be real, it's all about belonging. It comes down to this sense of belonging. How are we going to create greater connections with each other and greater connections with the land around us? That's the big existential design question to solve, in a way. That's the big decision we've got to make, really. Because unless you know, and Margot Neal, the Senior Indigenous Curator at the National Museum of Australia, says, until you know the stories of this land, you will never truly belong here. You will be a transplant, just like that borrowed architecture, just like that borrowed landscapes. And so I'm just going to run through a few design outputs from all of that thinking. And I think we've still got... we're in this great place, I think, in Australia where there is this, finally... I always joke that my career was kind of 20 years too early because, I started out in the 90s working for the government architect in an Aboriginal architecture group. We spent 15 years talking about all this stuff that nobody really cared about. But now there is this amazing, I guess the last 5 years has been this incredible optimism for me anyway, because anyone who lived through the Howard years would know that there was a time where you weren't allowed to talk about Australia's true history. You weren't allowed, It was called the black armband view of history. And so don't talk about it. And at least now we have this opportunity to kind of to have this reckoning with our past and think about how we're going to design an Australia moving forward. And just looking at the objects, obviously, we're carving them with with meaning. They have a sophisticated function. Sure, they're aesthetic. Yes, they're environmentally sustainable. Yes, but they also have this other layer of storytelling attached to them. Just like Franco Manamana said, right? And how can we create this living and breathing object, these living artefacts? And that can be anything from a small object to a building or a city. I did a project with Breville, which I actually pitched to them 17 years ago. And anyone in the room who's used to pitching and getting rejected, this one's for you. Because they literally rang me up like 3 years later, and 14 years later, sorry, it was 3 years ago, and said, oh, well, you remember that project? Can we do it? And that was this notion of taking objects that people use every day and wrapping them with country. So that as people are making their morning coffee, they can unlock the library of the dreaming. They can go through that process of mnemonic learning, that remembering about country. And we worked with the Pintupi Nine, which were the group of Aboriginal people, 9 Aboriginal people that walked out of the desert in 1984 and saw a white man for the first time. And as they were painting on these objects, this is Wallampiri Japulchari, they are singing. And they are travelling that country. And you know, when I had to go out there and make breakfast for everyone so that they could understand what a juicer was. And they immediately went medicine machine. And the toaster, they talked about grains. The coffee machine was about ritual. And so they said, oh no, we need a men's coffee machine and a women's coffee machine. And even when Yakulti Napangadi, you know, she created... we worked also with Lucy Simpson, who's an artist from Sydney, because, you know, we didn't want to just do this sort of romantic, you know, desert artist kind of thing. We wanted to show that there were contemporary artists living in Sydney as well. But, you know, Yakulti Napangadi, she's probably one of the best contemporary artists in the world. Actually, I was trying to tell her that... Jay-Z bought one of her paintings for Beyonce and she just didn't give a fuck. Which I just love. But if you go up to the painting, there's 5 dots and they're the 5 places that the women go on when they're going through their initiation. And we name them every time that she was doing those, and she was singing that song. So when she's making the painting, she is travelling that country in her mind. And when she saw, we sold them in Harrods in London and in Bloomingdale's in New York. She walked straight up to it and started singing and doing the dot movement next to it. So these objects can have incredible meaning. It was interesting. There's a whole nother talk I can do around IP. But Breville were amazing. They donated 100% of their profits to my design school, which was great. But, you know, part of what they wanted to do was position themselves as an Australian design company, because people don't know that they're Australian. But also in conversations with them, they're kind of like, you know, the world is very fleeting and it is highly accelerated. And there's definitely, I think, this thirst for wanting to hang on to enduring stories, wanting to hang on to First Nations stories, because they're solid, they're old, they're ancient, they're a tradition. I think traditions and rituals are going to become more important to us as we enter this new age of acceleration, because otherwise we're just going to become, you know, super anxious. But the buildings that we do also take on this life. You know, we designed a hospital in Wilcannia and it became part of the river cod. And so instead of talking about walls and roofs, we talked to the community about skins and fins and gills, and it takes on a different language, which I think creates a different design language. And, you know, I work a lot in public art as well, and so it's really about kind of, you know, bringing, you know, stories about that broader cultural landscape to bear within public art. And there's a lot there. But with a lot of what I do now is in urban design. And as I said, I'm focusing only around Sydney because it's my nation, because there's this huge engagement piece with traditional owners, and you've got layers of engagement. You've got communities of country, the people that have been there for thousands of years, but then these people who have come in the last 250 years, and all of them are part. And then the people who have come later, and the non-Indigenous people. And so all of them are part of the fabric that you if you look at them all as separate strings, how are you going to weave those stories together to make a place? And we talk about the rematriation of country. This is Barangaroo. Barangaroo used to be a headland. It was the highest point in the harbour. And then just over time, the maritime industry just blew it up. And there's so many stories of the destruction of country like this around Australia. And I'm sure where you're all from, just look into it, because there would have been whole islands, whole headlands, whole places that just were so augmented that a big part of what we're trying to do on a grand scale is rematriate country, bring country back to the people. And you'll never be able to bring it back in its former form, but that you can take the best of sort of ancient knowledges and ancient storytelling and Western technology and create the best cities in the world. I believe that. I'm working on the White Bay redevelopment in Sydney, and it's an old coal power station which hosted the Biennale and will kind of continue to host the Sydney Biennale. But we are creating an increased site for the white seahorse. We know that there's a little seahorse that lives in this harbour here, and it's a working harbour. And in the dreaming, we used to have these places called increased sites. So you would go to these sites to do ceremony to increase the population of an animal, or it could be to increase an elemental force like rain or lightning. So there's lightning places, there's rain places. What we're going to try and do in the context of a contemporary metropolis is create an increased site for this endangered white seahorse. Why? Because the white seahorse is one of the few species where the male carries the baby, and I'm all for that. And they also mate for life. Like, what an ideal male. So I'm doing everything I can to keep that little Jesus alive. So what we're doing is we're creating in the landscaping, we're actually taking the top metre of the high tide and flushing it through these channels where we take salt marsh, and we'll probably end up putting some high-tech water filtration, I think, in these channels as well, just to beef it up, because Sydney Harbour's pretty contaminated. So that, we're really working hard to clean the water. We'll use salt marsh and different plants to do that, but what's really beautiful is that the site can breathe water in and out every 12 hours, and so you can have also in those channels, songlines and different public art that can conceal and reveal over time. We're also releasing the creek. I think about Melbourne, is it Elizabeth Street was a creek, right? And then it flowed down into the Yarra, and there was like a metre, a waterfall. So you just think about if anyone wants to start a campaign to release the creek and Elizabeth Street, I'm all for that. I've put in several bids for projects where I'm trying to do that, and they've all been rejected, so we're not there yet. But releasing creeks is part of what I have to do all the time, and that's about taking stormwater into natural reticulation systems and just exposing it. It's like such a crazy idea to have a creek instead of a fucking drain. And then we want to create motels for these seahorses as well, because we need to have habitat. So we found out that shopping trolleys are the favourite habitat of seahorses. So shopping trolleys that people have thrown into the harbour. So we're getting, in our design school, we're doing a program called Cribs for Kin, and we're making habitat for, we'll sort of get shopping trolleys and make new motels out of them. I don't know how they're going to look, but I love it because I've got a Westfield dreaming, so I'm into it. But then, of course, we need to have a seahorse festival. So what I'm doing is working with the landowners, Placemaking New South Wales. They're really into it and they're drinking the Kool-Aid at the moment. So I'm really hopeful that, we could even have a seahorse festival so that the people who live in the Balmain area around White Bay, perhaps they will take on some of the perpetual energies of the seahorse. Maybe the seahorse will become part of them and they will become the clan group that will take care of the seahorse. I think it's kind of about weaving together what we have in a modern society, those tools that we have for placemaking, and trying to reverse engineer the dreaming in some way. It's not going to be perfect, it's not going to be beautiful and sustainable and just wonderful like it was, for so many thousands of years. But I mean, Aboriginal people had to adapt as well, right? So we're good at that. But there is this other dimension, and that is about truth-telling. I think that if you're talking about the memory of place, we can't shy away from the bad, dark history that we're all living amongst. We need to, because the honest truth is that we are a country that is still in trauma, like multi-generational trauma. All of us are. And it's really interesting in the history wars, Howard switched it so he said, okay, black people are blaming white people, which was so wrong, because it's actually England's fault. Like, England made a whole lot of crooked decisions between 1770 and 1788. None of us know anything about it. We want to see the minutes of the meeting. I want to see where they decided that it would be a really good idea to create the most beautiful jail on earth and just see what happens. And then we'll all sit here and just blame each other for it forever. And it's just like the most ridiculous and silly thing ever. And I think that the truth-telling process will be really healing for this country, and it will actually bring a lot of stuff to light. This is a sculpture that I did at the site where Captain Cook landed, and he spoke to my ancestors. What my ancestors said to him was "Warawarawa, Warawarawa," which had always been written on this plaque as "Go away, go away." It's not true. That is just not true. What they were saying was that dead, these people are dead. Because my people believe that people with white skin are the reincarnation of their dead ancestors. So our people believe that a whale had gone over the ocean, died, and come back as Captain Cook. So the response to that from a design perspective was to create a sculpture that was part Endeavour ship and part the bones of a whale. And they are actually, if you overlay the cross-section of a ship and the bones of a whale, they're almost identical, because I think the Vikings must have been doing a bit of biomimicry there, but it was a very, just a nice way of kind of representing a ghost ship at a site that has, I guess the identity of modern Australia is somewhere in between the ship and the shore, where these two histories collide. But the ceremony can be a part of the way that we activate a lot of these sites. And so, at Barangaroo, we did a beautiful ceremony as part of the Sydney Festival, which recognised the overfishing of the harbour. But every Mother's Day, we invite any mother to come down and have, because, Barangaroo is an amazing woman, she's Australia's first feminist. Awesome. So that site has become, by default, a sort of a women's place now. But we invite any mother, and this is taking an urban design activation budget where they would have used it for Mother's Day pampering or whatever. I don't even know. Like, they have all these retail activations where they go, Mother's Day, we're going to do this and that, and it's just bullshit. And so I'm taking those budgets and using that with a bunch of artists and getting together and adding some creativity to it. And we invite any mother to come down and have her baby welcome to country. And we will actually beef that up over time to become like our traditional welcome to country baby ceremonies, where we actually steam the babies with our medicinal plants and things like that. But it's a slow burn, and we'll do that ceremony over time. But the child is given seeds of a plant which they can go and plant in their homelands, and they become a carer for their homelands. They become part of Sydney. And all that has to be done with, very, very active engagement between landowners and traditional owners, and that is a whole process of cultural governance. But I have spoken over time, but I was told that I was allowed to. But it is a new Australian design, and I'm a prisoner of hope, and I think we could have the best country in the world that has the dreaming as a huge part of how we all live and work and relate to nature and relate to country. Thanks.